think one of the things I had to realize is I need to communicate a lot more than I thought I need to communicate, even though I communicated a lot, but it's still never enough. So maybe a good rule of thumb is as much as you communicate, it's probably not enough. You will find somebody who has not heard of it.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Product Ops Chronicles with myself, Graham Reed, my co-host and forever Product Ops pal, Antonia Landi. Hello, Antonia. Welcome back.
Hello, Graham. Lovely to be here as always.
Oh, always good. And today we are joined by Thorsten Löwenberg, a Senior Product Operations Manager at Miro. Thorsten, hello.
Hi, everybody. It's very nice to be here.
Yeah, lovely to have you. Thorsten, do you want to give a quick intro to yourself before we get started?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Thorsten Löwenberg. I'm originally from Germany, and currently I'm living in the beautiful Amsterdam, where I work at Miro for the last 3 years. And for the last 10 years, I've been working in the ops and transformation space and worked in startups and also in enterprises. And when I joined Miro 3 years ago, I started working in individual product development streams. And then in the last year, we transitioned more into a more global role where I worked on processes over the whole of the product development streams. And I'm happy to be here and talk about Product Ops.
Fantastic. Oh, really great to have you. I'm excited to hear about your time at Miro. And which brings us on to why we're here today. We're going to talk about building product ops from scratch. Now, I think between Antonia and I, we've probably talked about this dozens of times in various different contexts with various different people on this podcast and elsewhere. But Thorsten, when you started at Miro, and I know from when we were planning this, Miro was already in a very, very good place, or kind of post-hyperscaling. So this is something a little bit different, I think, to the conversations that we usually have, which is, an organization is usually more in a scale up, the start of this scale up sort of phase, and going, hey, we need to start, improving things, as we go. Whereas, I'd really would love to now dive into kind of Miro's journey, or your journey, with Miro on this at potentially a much later stage than other organizations that will be looking at product ops. So over to you, sir.
Yeah, this question, how to start product ops, I think it's a very interesting question, and one that usually interests people who first get into contact with that topic, because also it's not an easy answer, because every company is individual. And so this question needs to be answered differently in every company. For example, when I started at Miro 3 years ago, we were just at the end of the hypergrowth stage. And when I started, we were starting with over 80 people that month. And then in the following month, we ramped that down, and we went more into the stabilization phase, which meant we had a lot of people there who were very enthusiastic, very motivated. So there were tons of things going on already. And there was already product ops established when I came. Not in every development stream, but we had an overall product ops office and we had overall processes. But the situation that I found in the streams that I joined was you have a lot of people who came from previous companies where they got into contact with ops. And all of them brought their previous experience and their previous knowledge into the new company. And then they tried to recreate that in their company. So you had a lot of island solutions that were working for the people in the context. But the more you scaled up, the more those solutions did not work well together with each other. And for me, that was one of the first challenges to A, understand all of them, and B, figure out how can we unify that, at least in the beginning, in one of the streams. So all those teams would work properly together and would have the same direction and the same altitude when they were reporting about things.
Very interesting. I think that kind of tension between what works in a team's individual context and then what works for the larger work stream or group is one that we come across very often, right? And there is this idea that product ops exists purely to make sure that everybody works exactly the same way. I think it's oftentimes a lot more nuanced than that. So I'd love to better understand how you managed, that kind of tension between making sure teams are enabled, to do the work in a way that suits them, makes sense for them, but also make sure that the bigger picture makes sense.
Yeah. I think the first cadence that we all agreed upon was a quarterly planning, because that was also the cadence that we had all over Miro. So we did quarterly plannings, and even that, establishing that was a challenge in the beginning because there were different reporting cadences or over the stream or the streams. I mean, let's talk about one stream first because it is a logical unit. But once you go into other streams, all the streams were operating differently at the start. So we agreed upon the quarterly cadence, and we agreed upon a format for the stream. And again, here, the format of one stream does not necessarily relate with the formats of the other streams. And we agreed upon a tool. How do we want to do the reporting? And where do we want to do the reporting? And then the next step was we agreed upon a process that we said, okay, we will use a Miro board. We will use data that we have in Jira in the case of our stream. And then we will pull this data from Jira into the Miro board, and there we will enrich it with additional information that we need to make decisions on the stream level. And then every team did that on their own. And in the end of the planning process, we had one big room meeting where the whole stream came together with the stream leads, and every team presented their strategy for the next quarter. And then in the room, we could make decisions to say, okay, are those the right things that we should focus on, or should we do something different, or should we do something else first? And then we agreed upon this strategy for the stream and signed it off on the Miro board and went ahead into the next quarter. And we did that for almost a year before we transitioned to a different format. But for this first 4 quarters, that gave us the stability and the alignment that we needed in the stream to be sure that we are working together on the right things. Other streams did it differently. They even used different tools. So this was just for one stream. And then once this was stabilized in one stream and differently in the other streams, we then agreed, okay, we need to find a better way to align topics that are across stream, because we are running into the same problems we ran into when we started stabilizing the streams, because we cannot talk to each other. It's always a big translation effort to understand what has the other stream planned, where are their informations, what tools are they using. So then we started aligning the streams as well. So we have one strategy that can be easily understood all over the product development organization.
It's very interesting, though, because, it's absolutely something that I think we can fall into that trap of, is saying, well, let's align everybody. Let's get everybody working the same. But actually, at what point in the life cycle, in the timeline, do you actually do that? Because what you've said there was absolutely fascinating. What we've done is we've said, actually, let's focus on getting that alignment first in terms of how the alignment in the kind of the quarterly planning. Make sure that is good. We've done that over the course of a year. We've done that over several cycles, so that actually that process in itself is good, is working, is providing valuable output. And of course, the business has to keep running. It needs that output to keep running. So that's really important. Other teams have done, I'm assuming, the same thing, different tools, different methodologies, but actually the cadence is working, the outputs are working, everybody's aligned. So now you've got some, let's say, some really well-defined streams, as you put them, that are working well. The outputs are looking really good, but when you stack them on top of each other, they are all working very differently. And so now the cross-alignment between them is the next challenge to solve. That's a really, really interesting approach. And I think it's something that I think we probably all actually do in Product Ops, but never really take the time to think about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the interesting thing here is this, it's the translation effort, right? That comes when you do give teams full autonomy. And it's not about a reduction in autonomy. It's about being able to make things comparable, because quarterly planning isn't all there is. There is stuff that lives above that, right, at a higher strategic level, and there is stuff that lives below that, which is the more tactical stuff of really what are we shipping this week, this month, etc., etc. And that, when that is surrounded by abstraction levels, translation levels, right, different tools even, that's such an important point of, okay, well, in my work stream, our single source of truth is Jira, but then another person's work stream, who I might be reliant on, right, for a particular thing, it lives in, goodness me, Asana or Miro, right? And then having to learn everybody's sort of idiosyncrasies, that's when friction gets higher and higher. And I think that's really when work then starts slowing down across the group.
And my experience was that this need grew organically, because at the beginning, when I started out, we had a lot of questions inside of the stream. People were unsure what are other teams doing, what was the general strategy. And once this need was fulfilled, because we had the quarterly planning and people had a good grasp on what's happening inside of the stream, now suddenly new needs came up. Like, for example, hey, we have cross-stream dependencies and they are not resolved in our planning. We are planning our own things, but then we go to the other stream and they have done their own planning and that does not align in any way. So out of this need, we started to say, okay, how can we make this easier? How can we add that to our process? Because we haven't included the streams or the other streams in the beginning. And then out of that need, we started talking to the other streams, and then we figured out, okay, they're doing things very differently to us. And then we agreed with the other streams, can we find a common model that will work for both streams and that will make it easier to have the cross-stream dependencies or the cross-stream alignment that we need. And after that happened, we had other needs that came up. So bit by bit, from small to bigger, this grew out of the needs from the people working with the process. And I think this is also the best way to do it, because if you try to start too big and you are new in a company, you don't have the trust that is necessary to roll that out. People will not go that with you. They need to have some proof that this will help their work, because I mean, they don't know you, they don't know the processes, so they need to have proof first. And once you have the trust, and once you showed them by examples, hey, this will make your life better and easier, they will come to you with other needs that they have. And I think it's best if it grows organically like that.
Oh, we're back to trust all over again. The amount of times I think we've had this conversation on this podcast is how important trust is, and building that trust early on. And I think, Antonia, you and I have debated this as well. You know, we can go into that low-hanging fruit conversation all over again, and we won't do that. But as you said, regardless, is building that trust up so that when you have got to try and then ask for those, let's tell it, those more difficult things, those more bigger changes on the individual, when you need to go and ask them, to have that faith to kind of say, hey, will you go on this journey with me? Having that trust there of proof of what you can do, that actually what you're there to do is to help others and improve the ways that they work, reduce that friction, is just becomes that much easier.
Yeah, but I really, really love the way you're putting it, Thorsten, as well, where this grew organically, right? There was a need within the work stream to mutualize in order to have effective planning. And then once that hurdle was reached, people realized, okay, but cross-planning, cross-stream planning now is really difficult. So there is actually a legitimate need to extend that harmonization, let's say, right, to other parts of the organization. And I think sometimes we get a bad rap of just going top down first, like mutualize everything for the sake of mutualization, right? And I think this is such an important point and such an important reminder that you should, as a product ops person, you should start small, right? You should start to sort of effectively remove barrier and then understand what that unlocks next. Because there might be a case where mutualization actually isn't necessary. Does every team need to write their Jira tickets in exactly the same format? Probably not, right? Some folks might be working on B2B, some folks might be working on B2C. They might be a platform team, right? They might have completely different specifications or requirements for something as granular as a Jira ticket. But is it important across the organization to be able to figure out dependencies, figure out collaborations, work and live on that same cadence? Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think that is also very important that you give teams this freedom, because we have the situation at Miro. We have teams that are front-end facing and they're very customer-centric. And we have platform teams or support teams that support internal customer. And their ways of working are fundamentally different. I mean, yes, they both have to deliver something at some point and have to align that with the customer, but it's a big difference if it's an internal customer or an external customer. So we acknowledged that and gave them the possibility to optimize on their requirements that they're having. And that goes so far that we also said, hey, we will have 2 different kinds of hackathons. One are more product-centric and more customer-centric. And then we have something that is more developer-centric or internally focused. And we call that the DevX week, a week where the developers can improve with project their internal workings and their dev environments. Because a hackathon, it's more flashy, it's more front-endy, and the DevX week has the same impact, but the presentation is completely different. So we had both events for those 2 specific cases, and everybody could choose, do I want to go into the normal hackathon or do I want to go into the DevX week, and had the chance to get fame and praise for their projects that they were doing. And I think it's very important to acknowledge that you cannot just have one system that will fit all. You have to make a decision. At what point do we stop with the unification and say, hey, set up your optimal processes for your environment and for your needs?
Love it.
It's so interesting. This topic is really going circles in my mind at the moment about, firstly, what's the cost of this friction between the teams? What's the effort that put into in terms of this translation? Because actually, if we picture this out a little bit, each of the teams can let's just say could do what they wanted in terms of their own squads, their own streams, in terms of how they work. And then actually the part that we only care about is when the translation comes in. So actually, if the effort that Product Ops then focuses on is to say, actually, what's that translation look like? And of course, then the effort is then on the product teams themselves or the squads to say, okay, well, we can do what we like, but we then need to put effort in how that translation happens between when we need to collaborate. And there's also another layer to that as well, which is the piece that I'm always very interested in, which is how do we then work with, coordinate and communicate with the wider business? Because arguably that's a translation layer in itself as well, but that translation layer is absolutely one that needs to be unified because the wider business, the commercial side of the business, fundamentally doesn't care whether you've got 1 squad, 5 squad, 50 squads. They only see it as typically as product or as tech, and they need that consistency there. So it's very interesting to say actually there's different levels of potentially effort and focus on these translation layers between individual squads and that wider business.
Yeah, what we created fairly recently is what we call the way of working or the operating system of Miro, which is the idea behind that is that we use similar principles on every level of the organization. So we will use a product development lifecycle with different process steps, and we will use it on the strategy level or the org-wide level. And we try to use a very similar process on the stream level and a very similar process then on the team levels, which is lightweight enough that you still give the teams the autonomy they need to fulfill their specific roles, but similar enough. So when you do it on team level, you will need very little translation work to be able to do it on stream level, and the same again on organizational level, because the fundamentals are the same. The rituals are the same. The processes are the same. It's just, as you said earlier, you don't have to fill out the Jira ticket in a certain way and things like that. We do not describe something like that, but the rituals, the cadence, things like that are the same, whatever level of the organization you are in. And that also allows people to again, organically grow. If they want to grow and develop from being on the team level and leading projects on the team level, you can give them the chance to step up and do it on a stream level or even on an org level. It's just the RACI will change significantly depending on where you are inside of the organization, but the processes themselves will stay similar enough that you can, with a bit of reading, you can understand what do I need to do in addition to what I did before to be able to lead a ritual like a kickoff or a solutions review on the org level.
I love that. Like, it's so interesting to think about this in terms of orders of magnitude, right? And you get this kind of unified way of how Miro believes, good work looks like. And I think that's always something I try to do with client engagements as well, where we just look at, in this company, right? What does planning look like? What do we believe a good goal looks like? Because it doesn't always have to be things like OKRs, right? Maybe that's not what you vibe with. That's not what your organization really is set up to do. Maybe it's something completely different. Maybe it's something homebrewed, right? But I love this idea of flight levels, basically, right? A good goal is a good goal is a good goal. Doesn't matter whether it's on a team level or whether it's on a senior leadership level. At the end of the day, you're communicating the same way, and I think that's really important.
Awesome. What's been your kind of experience as you've gone through this journey? You know, kind of over, I think you said 3 years, at Miro. From when you started, you know, what's been kind of your good, your bad, and your ugly as you've gone through this process, and what have you learned from this?
Well, I think the first thing that I had to understand is that everyone has a different perspective on the same problem, because I'm coming from my product ops view, and things that are very clear to me and make total sense to me do not necessarily make sense to an engineering manager or a product manager, because they have their perspective on the problem and they are looking into it from their perspective. And it's very interesting. I have a colleague who moved from product ops to product management, and she was very product ops focused. And then when we talked half a year later, she said, well, I now understand why the product managers always had a very different perspective, because I have very little touch points with the ops stuff. I'm now completely focused on my product management topics. And I think that is very, very hard to grasp if you don't have the experience, because you read a lot and you work yourself into a topic, and then you are an expert in it. And then you come to someone else and you think, hey, I explained it clearly and I explained it enough and they should all have understood it. And then you meet somebody who has never heard of it before and you think, hey, how can that happen? But it can happen. So I think one of the things I had to realize is I need to communicate a lot more than I thought I need to communicate, even though I communicated a lot, but it's still never enough. So maybe a good rule of thumb is, as much as you communicate, it's probably not enough. You will find somebody who has not heard of it. And again, this starting small and building up trust. I think next to the processes and the knowledge, trust is the most important currency you're having. You have to find champions who will work with you, and you have to have success stories that you can show others, and you can explain, hey, this is why we are doing it. This is a testimonial of somebody who had real help by using it. And then once you start growing from there, it is a lot easier to roll out bigger things. And it's also a lot easier to reach out to other parts of the organization you have not been working in, because you have those champions, you have those success stories, and you can explain, hey, this is what works really well with us. Are you willing to give it a try in your stream? And it will not disrupt your ways of working fundamentally, but those are the things we would like you to try, because it will make it easier to work with us. And that took a bit of learning and experience, how you can roll that out and how you can expand it. But once you have that over a bigger part of the product development organization, it is then a lot easier to say, hey, let's do something like the Miro OS, where we change fundamental things for the whole part of the organization, but we still keep it lightweight and will not dictate how you have to work in every single aspect. But there are a couple of things that will make it easier for everybody if we all adhere to it. But again, with the trust, it is a lot easier to get that change done in a bigger part of the organization. And then the next thing that I found surprising is when I started at Miro in Amsterdam, we were working in 2 buildings across the street. So you had to go across the street, and you wouldn't believe it was like we were working in 2 different companies. So in one building, we had the product development organization. And then across the street, we had go-to-market, sales, marketing, customer success. And it was like 2 different companies. And just crossing that street was like, oh, I have to do a business trip, but not a lot. So it was really like we were working in 2 different companies. And that was one of the things we changed just a month ago, where we said, okay, we will go all into one big building. And the effect was immediate and significant. So this communication barrier has lessened a lot. I wouldn't say it's completely gone, but it hasn't lessened a lot, because you can just say, okay, I'm coming to your desk and let's have a conversation. And I would not have thought that crossing a street would be such a big barrier, but it is.
Interesting.
Amazing. Well, that it's like a physical silo almost. I can really imagine how the culture would almost sort of breed differently and evolve differently depending on which building you're in. Well, very, very interesting and really sort of positive to hear that actually changed significantly once you were co-located again in one and the same building.
Yeah, and I mean, it's things like that you have to think about when you are looking at ops and ops processes, because silos do not just happen in an organizational structure. It can be things like, hey, we are in two different locations, even if those locations are very close to each other, or it is somehow in other ways hard to have those two organizational parts communicate. So maybe one of the things that you always have to think about when you do ops is, how do I remove obstacles like that? I mean, how can you remove it? How can you remove communication barriers? And how can you help with processes or practices to lessen those hurdles to talk to each other? Because that's one of the things in my experience that always causes the most friction. Once communication slows down or even breaks down, every individual group develops on their own, and they develop away from each other, and common understanding gets lost. And that is, for me, always one of the things I'm looking for. Do we have some breakdown in communication? Do we need to have common events or things like that to help strengthen this communication bond again? And that's what we also tried while we were still in the two buildings, that we said we have cultural events like connect events where we invite both groups and give them the chance to talk to each other and give them the chance to present things they are doing to each other to lessen this barrier that we are having.
Very, very interesting. It's actually very timely for me, very personally at the moment, because where I'm at Helios at the moment, I've recently done a kind of a one-to-one kind of round table with all of the product managers that I've got here. And one of the key takeaways has been that we as the product leadership have not done as good a job as we could have done in terms of communicating the changes that we're making, not in terms of the changes, but why we're making them. Why are we asking for, this report to be done? Who's using it? What's the value of all of this? Not as a case to say, well, why should we do it? But more a case of to say, and I actually had this directly from one of the product managers, to say, look, this helps me be, to be honest, more enthusiastic about doing it. This really, sparks as to why I'm doing it. It helps set the context when I'm writing these reports, when I'm writing these updates. And it's not something honestly, I've ever really thought about before. It's really made me appreciate actually almost over communicating what we're doing and why we're doing it. So very, 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 very timely. And love the piece that you said as well, Thorsten, about removing those barriers to communication. We talk about removing barriers across the board in product operations, but on communication in particular, not just for us to the people that we're working with, but actually removing those barriers between departments, between teams, between areas of the business, is so important as well. And I absolutely love that idea of bringing people together. And once again, it's very timely for me because we have been a real crusade to try and reduce the amount of meetings that are happening. We do have a lot of meetings where we have with the product teams. We're trying to reduce those down to give them back more time, more thinking time to do their fundamental job. But actually, we are also starting to find at the same time some of those gaps now starting to widen even more in terms of that relationship between the teams. So it's a real conundrum to say, actually, how do we make sure that the right meetings are happening and we're reducing down the ones that actually could be combined or of less use, less value, and give them the time back that they need. And so it's a real balancing act, in that respect.
Yeah, that always was a big balancing act with us as well, because people have a lot of meetings, and when I came, people had a lot of rituals that were just set up and were running. And one of the things we did at some point was that we had like calendar sweep, where we said, okay, let's really get rid of everything and then just put the rituals in again that we think are necessary. And we found a couple of things that were just discarded after the calendar sweep, because we said, hey, we have been doing them, but everybody thinks they bring low value or no value at all. So let's just get rid of them. But then you want to have like connection events or other social events to help people to connect to each other and talk to each other. So what we did at the start is we usually did them on a Friday, that we say, hey, Friday afternoon, we do a connect event and we have food and drinks. And at the end, we even had a DJ because we have an internal DJ club and we could get a DJ at every event. And then we added games. So it was a very big social event that also had an informative character because people could have presentations and ask questions. And that was quite a well-received event. But once deadlines come closer, you could really see it. When deadlines come or we will have a release event, those events will be less visited. And you could see it on your curve. If there's time and people have the mental capacity to come to that, they would love to come to it. But if stress gets higher or deadlines loom, the attendance gets lower. And it's really, you could see it if you look over a calendar and you can see, hey, there was a release event, there was a release event. But the feedback I got from people who presented and wanted to have discussions was, I don't have a ton of people coming by because we did it like a fair. You had like your fair station and you presented things. I don't have a ton of people coming by because we had a lot of events where you could choose from. But those people who were interested and were coming by, they usually had deep and long conversations. It was not unusual that someone had a conversation of an hour or an hour and a half about some topic and that they made a real connection, said, hey, let's meet next week and work on this further. And I think that was the big KPI of this event, that you could make a big, deep connection, but also you could just have fun or socialize depending on what your mood or need was on that event.
I love that. Super interesting. Now, one thing that I've found is when it comes to rolling out product ops practices across the group, what is sometimes helpful is to have this kind of first starting point, this pilot group, pilot work stream, even if it's just to, I guess, be a little bit more honest or shine a light on, yes, this is difficult, and here is how we're tackling this, so that the people who might get involved at a later date or once you're thinking about broader harmonization across the group, people almost have that confidence of, okay, even if we do encounter roadblocks along the way, we are equipped, to handle those, or we know how we'll be able to have those conversations. Is that something that you've come across as well?
I think our situation was a bit different because we developed every stream in parallel. So there was not this one stream who had a very good example that we wanted to roll out to everyone. So we came to the point that we had all the streams that had operational support and that had developed to a certain point. And then we said, okay, but now we have to find a common ground on the organizational level. And what happened in the end is that we sat down with the stream leads and said, this is what we want to achieve and what are your needs from the stream side to be able to fulfill this need on the organizational level. And then we agreed on one trial balloon that we would start over all of the streams. And that would only touch the stream leads in the beginning. So it was still affecting a small group of people, just on a higher flight level. And then once this trial was successful, we iterated from it, did our lessons learned. And then in the next iteration, we said, okay, now we are also rolling it out on multiple levels below the stream leads. And we grew it that way. So it was a sort of top-down process or a middle to top to bottom process. But we still tried to start it with a small group and try it. And then once we had the first results and with the second version, we then grew further up and further down.
Brilliant.
Very interesting.
Yeah. We're rapidly coming towards the end of this session today. I'd love to just hear kind of any further advice that you have, Thorsten, on what you've done, any tips that you have, particularly I think anybody that's working in product ops that's going into kind of more your situation whereby the company is established, the company is thriving, and now actually kind of you're now trying to corral everybody into making further efficiencies in what they're doing, very much what we've got from what you've explored today. So what would be your kind of some of your tips and tricks for people going into those same situations?
Well, when you are in a situation where you have a company that is established, has already operations, is first to understand all the stakeholders who are involved. You talk to the PMs, talk to the stream leads, talk to the EMs, talk to the designers, understand each perspective, because that is super important. They will have a different perspective than you have on a certain situation, and you have to understand their perspective and their needs. And then look out for communication problems. If they tell you, hey, we have a big problem talking to that team, or we have a different problem talking to that hub or to the building across the street, find out why is this problem there, and try to minimize this friction. You might not be able to eliminate it, but try to think about how can you minimize this friction, and always try to keep the group you're starting out with as small as possible. And even if you're not starting on a team level and you have to start on a stream level, still try to keep the group you're working with as small as possible and get started quickly. Start with something and iterate. Same as with product management. You want to have your customer feedback as quickly as you can, because all the planning is not as good as your first feedback. And then once you have your feedback, you can grow from there. And then follow the need. I mean, if the need is we have to align more on a higher level, think about how can you do that? And again, how can I keep the group small for the first iteration? If the need is we have to better understand what our teams are doing in the stream, think about how you can grow in that direction. Follow the need, because then it will be a lot easier to make this change, as if you are just making the change because it sounds like a good idea or it was in a book or something like that. Follow the need, and people will be more willing to help you establish those changes, especially if they trust you, that you listen to them, that you understand them, and that you will always iterate, that this first version is not the final version and they have to work like that for the next 10 years.
How much kind of top-down pressure did you have for kind of certain initiatives? So kind of, you talked a lot about kind of follow the need. Absolutely love that. Absolutely agree with that. It feels like you had quite a lot of autonomy to kind of go after the things that you felt were the right things to go after. How much top-down pressure did you have to kind of say, hey, no, we need to go and fix this? And actually, this is a common problem across all of the streams and all of the teams. So actually, there is a need to kind of be much more standardized than maybe you've described so far. How much of that pressure did you get?
Well, actually, we had very little pressure in that regard. I mean, we had common artifacts that we needed to deliver out of the stream, but the way how we are doing it was pretty much left up to the stream leads, and I could assist there, but there was not the pressure, you have to use this tool and you have to use this format, at least not in the beginning. I mean, later when we developed this OS, this operating system, we were a lot more specific on what is the cadence in which we want to do all those different rituals. How should the ritual look like? What are the key things you should have in the ritual? But still, it was not set in stone. Those descriptions, those ways of working, rules were more to help you as a guideline to bring the right things to the table to start a conversation and to align the stakeholders. It was not that, hey, if you don't have all of those ticks set in your checkbox, then you should not show up. It was never like that. It was rather, hey, bring as much as you have, but come quicker. Then you have to have everything ticked, or you should not schedule the event. So it's always come quick, bring everything you have, let's have a conversation. And this is how Miro operates. We want to do things quickly. We want to not lose a lot of time. And sometimes it is hard to have everything ready for a kickoff or everything you need for a solutions review. But we rather have a conversation 2 or 3 times than teams sit there and, waste a lot of hours trying to ponder things that can be solved with a quick conversation with the right people.
It's really very interesting. I've personally experienced kind of both sides of this, to work somewhere where, got huge amount of freedom to kind of just go, look, Graham, look, Product Ops, go and tell us what you want to do. And then the other side of it, which is kind of, hey, go after these things. I don't think there's any dispute about kind of being left to go after these things in the way that is felt best. But certainly have workplaces whereby actually, we need this. And this is how we want to see it, and this is the priority over it as well. And, even in terms of that prioritization, you will always go and prioritize for yourself these different changes and improvements that you want to make. But there can be different levels of pressure that come down to say, okay, look, we want to see this first, we want to see this next. This is not important for now, and there's no right or wrong way on this. Antonia, I'm getting curious to hear what you think about that and what you've experienced in that respect.
Yeah, I think I've been quite lucky in that I've always gotten the autonomy to go out, have those conversations and then more come with a proposal, right? Have senior leadership sentiment feed into that proposal as a data point rather than sort of get a prioritized list. Although I would say that even with something like a list, as you say, right, as a product ops person, leader, it is your responsibility to trust but verify, right? To make sure that folks are on the right track, specifically because, as Thorsten said, right, people have different contexts. They see things in different ways. And even though you might even have a lot of consensus around what needs to be done and where the friction is on the leadership level, right? That might be completely different on the ground level. That might be completely different with an engineering manager, AP, somebody in QA, data, etc., etc. So I think it is super important, regardless of how you started the engagement, like under what circumstances you were hired, what folks told you, your top 3 priorities were. I think it is always just so important to go into the field, make sure you hear people's opinions, because you might then suddenly be privy to information that the folks who created the original plan maybe weren't so privy to. So I think it is super important to have these conversations.
Yeah. Thorsten, one more minute. Any last thoughts from yourself?
Well, I think being a product operations manager is a very interesting job, and it's the thing that I like in this field is that it's never the same. I mean, you can work in 3 different companies and the job will look completely different in all 3 spaces. And that is the thing that drew me to that profession in the first place, because you work a lot with people. And I started as a project manager, and they say in the PMI certification, they say about 80% of your work is talking. And I think this also translates to product operations, because you have to talk to people. You cannot sit in your office or in your home office or wherever and then craft a nice process and roll it out and it's done. That it will not work like that.
Yeah.
You have to talk with people a lot. You have to understand them. You have to build trust. I think trust and understanding are the most important currencies you have as a product operations manager. And then you roll out, you experiment, and it is a very interesting job. And even in the same company, it will redefine itself constantly because the needs will change and the levels you will operate on will change. So if you have not given it a try or think about give it a try, and you are interested in a job that is always changing and that will put you in a lot of contact with people, then product operations is probably a good candidate to give a try, because you will always be excited, you will always learn something new, and you will always redefine yourself in your role while you do that.
Wow. What a great way to end. Thank you so much. That's it for today's episode. So thank you firstly to my co-host, Antonia Landi, and to our very special guest today, Thorsten Löwenberg. Please do feel free to connect with any of us on LinkedIn. A really great conversation today. So thank you very much, Thorsten.
Thank you for having me. It was a blast.
Thanks as ever to our friends at the Product-Led Alliance for facilitating this ongoing series, doing all the editing and production, all clever bits and pieces like that. Thank you to everybody watching, and we look forward to welcoming you to the next episode of the Product Ops Chronicles. Thank you very much. Bye, everybody.